wristbands winner, Thierry Lockhart. I am urging you to practice social distancing to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Avoid large gatherings, and if you have to stand in a line, make sure you are 3 feet apart from the other person. Get vaccinated today, protect yourself, and be responsible.
And I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right. Man and woman, let us join in the fight.
Friday, September 3rd, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $90,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $90,000.
I am Hans John, the 2019 Vinci Ragasoka Monarch. I took the COVID-19 vaccine, and so should you. Let's be an example to others. Get vaccinated today and help control the spread of COVID-19.
Vaccinate if you want to eliminate the spread of the virus in our place, and do not procrastinate, but rather let us vaccinate. Get vaccinated today.
Coming up on the VC3 News Update, the Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Ralphie Gonsalves addressed the first Africa-CARICOM Summit of Heads of State and Government. 5 cases of the new variant were detected between July 19th and August 9th, 2021. The Milton Cato Memorial Hospital recorded an overall 85% attendance rate during yesterday morning's 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift. We'll have these stories and more coming up at 7 p.m. on the VC3 News Update.
Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Roundtable Talk. Our special guest on this evening's program is Professor Justin Robinson, of course, of Vincentian born, who has just recently been appointed Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Board for Undergraduate Studies at the UWI. And we are going to be talking a lot of things this evening related to COVID. But I think in light of his new appointment, which congratulations are in fact in order, I'd like to first start by asking you, what is the UWI doing to keep COVID-19 at bay?
All right, good evening. Thanks very much. Good evening to your viewers. So I'm going to have to try to keep a straight face and do a serious interview with my cousin. So, you know, I'll do my best here. So in terms of UWI's role in COVID-19, I would say it's multifaceted. So UWI trained doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals are on the front line in providing care for persons who have been impacted by COVID. And the fact that our governments have consistently invested in UWI and the healthcare capacity in the region means that right now we are not facing a shortage of able, well-trained professionals to provide that frontline care. And I think I'm quite proud of UWI's role. UWI scientists are also working quite closely with CARFA and other agencies in terms of doing some of the research. So I know in particular for Barbados, the UWI team here is quite engaged in doing some modeling of likely caseloads and so on. So UWI science is quite critical in the background. I think, and in other areas, UWI graduates are part of the policy response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that's a role in terms of managing and moving forward this pandemic is multifaceted. training frontline care, providing research and data to support our policymakers, and really being a forum for discussing and shaping the views as we deal with this unprecedented, fast unfolding, ever-changing phenomenon called the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, in terms of the student population, are classes still online, or are people actually attending classes?
Yes, so the response, the way we deliver our educational products, I think varies depending on the local circumstances. So given that the region where where we have our 4 landed campuses, Five Islands in Antigua, Mona in Jamaica, St. Augustine in Trinidad, and Cape Hill here are all really in the throes of this Delta variant. The vast majority of lectures are being delivered in the online mode. However, there are a few disciplines or subject areas where it's really quite challenging to be pedagogically sound in an online mode. So aspects of medicine, and particularly some of the science courses where you really do need to be in that lab and in that physical setting, or even areas like theater and dance, getting on that flow, those are being delivered in a face-to-face, in a limited face-to-face mode with the relevant social distancing and other safety protocols. So right now, majority of courses are online, safety first, but where for pedagogical reasons you really need some face-to-face, that's being done within the strictest possible COVID-19 protocols. I say safety first.
Okay, has UWI been hit by this disease in any way?
Yes, so we on all campuses, we've had students and colleagues who have been impacted. And in particular, Mona campus, we have lost colleagues who have died from the pandemic. So Mona and St. Augustine, we've had persons who are members of our community who have died. These are colleagues. I'm not aware of any students who have died as a result of the pandemic, but we've had infections among staff and students on all of our campuses.
Okay.
COVID is no respecter of anybody, touching one and all, everywhere.
Yes, and that brings me to the whole question of conspiracy theories, where a lot of people still don't think that this disease actually exists, and as a result, they are behaving in a particular way. What is your take on all these conspiracy theories with regard to COVID-19?
Yeah, so I mean, so I think COVID has put us into a very interesting space. And I mean, as an academic, as an economist, I specialize in behavioral economics, which is really quite, so it makes this period quite fascinating for me, just as a human. So in my area, economics, we tend to assume that people are rational and they make rational decisions. With behavioral economics, we explore a lot of, I mean, irrationality is a loaded word. So we call them biases. So let me give you a simple example. We just had Olympics of some of the things. So if you look at the medalists on the podium, you have gold, bronze, and silver medals. So if you were to think of it rationally, you would think the gold medalist would be the happiest person on the podium, the silver medalist second, and the bronze medalist third, right? But what the research consistently shows is that when you have like a major athletic event, the gold medalist is typically the happiest person, but the bronze medalist is typically happier and more satisfied than the silver medalist, which in a way we would say is not rational, but we think that reflects what we call in our field a bias, what we call reference dependence. So that when people are making decisions and judgments, having feelings, they have a reference point. The bronze medalist is thinking that I almost didn't get a medal. So the bronze medalist is very happy, is in general very happy that they actually wound up getting a medal. Whereas the silver medalist is thinking, I missed out on a goal, and is typically a bit less happy. So I give an example, talk about these biases and how people make decisions, and that there are a lot of these biases in terms of how we make everyday decisions. So I don't start off expecting people to be rational. I think it's important that we understand these biases and we frame our messaging in a way that sort of cuts through these biases. So for example, okay, so if you say the disease doesn't exist, my response to that would be to focus on something like hospitalization rates. So we have all sorts of viral and other types of illnesses. But as an objective fact, we would never have seen that many persons hospitalized for any of these illnesses in this particular period of time. So are they, I mean, you don't fake being, you could fake being ill, but do you fake being hospitalized? Do you fake being on a ventilator? So I think we should start from the point that don't expect people to be rational. And I always argue that all rational people are somewhat lazy. You want to enjoy your life. You know, people don't want to spend a lot of time thinking and processing these things. You know, my late grandfather used to always say that, you know, thinking is really hard work. So we shouldn't expect people to be thinking deeply on a lot of things. People tend to think deeply on a few things. So they react to simplistic messages, things that cut through the noise. So I think it's important to start with that viewpoint and acknowledge that these things are there. They help make life easier for us. You know, like another bias we say is that human beings tend to be overconfident. Now, statistically, the majority of us are by definition average drivers. Do you know anybody who describes themselves as an average driver, Teresa?
No, everybody is a perfect driver.
So, you know, so we have that overconfidence. But if you think about it, overconfidence in other aspects, it is a useful trait, huh? In other aspects, it helps us bounce back from the challenges of life. Because if you're really worried about everything and didn't have confidence in yourself, you might not leave your house on a day because of all the different risks of it. So overconfidence it seems to be a feature of humans. You know, we overestimate our own abilities in a whole variety of areas. Now that can be dangerous when you're getting into a field like virology and viruses and how they mutate and effective treatments. So again, I think it's important to start from an understanding that is how we are and craft your messaging. Because what you don't want is if we end up sort of labeling people backwards, stupid, etc., then they tune you out and you can't get through to them. That can be fine in your personal everyday life, but in circumstances where they could be carrying and pass on a virus that could kill you, you can't afford to have them tuned out and not listening. So I was quite pleased with your introduction, for example, when I saw the variety of medium and person that are being used on your program on TV to try to get to different audiences. Because I think that's something we all have to be careful about, because we tend to assume again that everybody is like the people you know well. Which is not, so it's a natural tendency. You tend to assume that everybody is kind of like your group. But it's not true. I mean, and you know, even though I studied this thing, it came through to me in a very real way a couple of days ago. We have this dashboard that comes out in Barbados every day with the number of COVID-19 cases. And on Sunday, it came through that we had 101 cases. That's the most we've ever had in one day. So when I called into the office Monday morning to see who was coming in, and nobody was in because everybody frightened. And the call went through to the security guard. And I kind of joking with him and say, boy, those 101 cases mean nobody ain't come work. And he's like, what are you talking about? You know, so he doesn't read the dashboard.
There you go.
It's not part of his information set. So you actually have to find people and medium that really gets into some very different areas, because I know in a world now where you have Netflix and all kind of things, there are people who probably don't even watch your TV station, you know. Or if they watch it, they don't watch news.
You're quite right about that. We'll take our first break and come back and talk some more along that line. Back in just a moment.
On the VC3 News Update, the Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Alfie Gonsalves addressed the first Africa-CARICOM Summit of Heads of State and Government. 5 cases of the new variant were detected between July 19th and August 9th, 2021. The Milton Cato Memorial Hospital recorded an overall 85% attendance rate during yesterday morning's 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift. We'll have these stories and more coming up at 7 p.m. on the VC3 News Update.
I am Hans John, the 2019 Vinci Ragasoka Muna. I took the COVID-19 vaccine, and so should you. Let's be an example to others. Get vaccinated today and help control the spread of COVID-19.
Vaccinate if you want to eliminate the spread of the virus in our place, and do not procrastinate, but rather let us vaccinate. Get vaccinated today.
Welcome back. Justin, just before the break, you're making a very important point. The fact that the security guard does not necessarily read the dashboards. But I noticed that one of the means we communicate throughout most of the Caribbean, probably globally, is the use of this dashboard. How do we reach these people? How do we reach the security guard?
Yeah, you know, and it's not, and I don't want to pretend that it's a simple problem, huh? Because there are persons that are on the fringes of your society in more ways than one. So on my Facebook feed, my Facebook page the other day, you know, Facebook always asking your business what's on your mind. I threw out the question whether financial incentives are part of the solution. Now, I don't think it's a magic bullet. Certainly not a first line solution. It's a solution I don't like. It's something very repulsive to me. But there are sections in your society who you might need to be vaccinated if you are to arrest the spread. That may only get up and come out and get vaccinated if the word is spreading that is X number of dollars to get a job. Huh? Now that's a pretty unpleasant, almost immoral sounding. But when you sometimes, I mean, because I'm an economist, but you start thinking when you look at the cost of paying per job, as an incentive compared to the cost of healthcare, what we are spending, the cost to the economy in terms of people impacted. So I say that to say you really need multiple messages, multiple incentives. You need punishments, you need inducements. Now, the word people use in the modern day parlance is influencers. Who are the influencers in these groups? And how do you get messages out to them? So, for example, in Barbados, if I wanted to reach that security guard because I know him, I would want to get somebody like a local entertainer we call Lil Rick here. And he has a popular program, Beginnish Rush Hour. And I can see Lil Rick doing a little jingle, you know, you go and get your joke, and you know, a pretty little nurse come and give you a joke in his hand. And you have to find ways to reach these people, and they're not all going to be pleasant and palatable, because you see, that person might be on the fringe. They're in a way what now we think is responsible, and you might look at them a certain way, but they live in a house, they go home, and they can pass that virus on to somebody in their household, who then interacts with a number of other people. So it's not a case. So I don't think we can afford to be snobbish. And there's a lot of scientific research about things like the vaccine for hepatitis B. Very common among the infection is very common among people who are heavy, hardcore drug users. Not a group that often tunes into mainstream media. They tend to be quite marginalized. They may have some criminal record history. They're not so keen to be seen in certain places. And in certain, and there's a lot of evidence, for example, that a financial incentive was quite important to getting members of that group to come forward. Okay, so again, I think it's really not something to be snobbish. You really have to try to understand people and meet them where they are, craft messages that get to them where they are, because they're not going to, majority are not going to come to you. So, I mean, in my circle, the dashboard is the big thing. When they come out of the dashboard late, everybody cussing, where the dashboard? And then we talk about it. So for me, kind of stood out that, you know, there are people in my same country who, what dashboard? So you need a different mechanism, a different message, and they might not care, you know, the dashboard, they might not care to read, because human beings are funny. One thing that always struck me growing up in St. Vincent is going to school, they say everybody can do maths, right? Maths is the hardest subject. But what's the most popular game on the block in St. Vincent? Dominoes. Dominoes is high-level statistics, permutations, combinations, so it's what people put their mind to. So people might not read that dashboard, that is not their thing. So you might need a different message that communicates the information that there's a significantly number, the cases are growing, people are dying, that there has to be a way to get, what message will get that group's attention?
Okay. Would you equate the offering of financial incentive to be vaccinated with the same thing as receiving financial incentive to vote?
Yes, I mean, and I've heard that, and I don't want it to say that I'm pushing that as any magic bullet, but I kind of mentioned it as an extreme example of as the only thing that may reach a particular group and get them to come off the fence and get vaccinated. I don't quite see it as the same thing. I don't quite see the equivalence. Because the impact of persons not being vaccinated can be quite dramatic on the rest of us. Huh? And in a sense, we coerce people to get vaccinated in other areas in a way that we don't coerce them to vote. So there are some countries where not voting is illegal. We haven't done that, but you know, you can't get your child into school if they're not vaccinated. Okay, so again, the broader point is a combination of information, persuasion, incentives, punishments, inducements. These are all part of the mix, because you need to do something to get 90% of your population vaccinated. So I think your mix of treatments has to be fit to the scale of the problem you're trying to address. We have never tried to vaccinate 90% or more of our population, particularly population including adults. This is an unprecedented challenge. And I often argue that one of the challenges I see in the region is we sometimes think that things that are complex are simple. We've not done this before, so to get to herd immunity, you are looking at around 90%. That's a huge swathe of your population, different types of people. And I think you have to be prepared to come with a solution that fits the scale of the problem that you are trying to address. And I hope I'm making myself clear, Teresa.
Yes, you certainly are. What about non-financial incentives? How do you see that working,
Yes,
and what could they be?
Non-financial incentives. So I can see companies, and there's a lot of precedent for this in the literature, and some companies are trying this in the US, that employees who get vaccinated can get an extra vacation day. So that's the kind of example of a non-financial incentive that is being used to really do the perverse thing of encouraging people to do something that is good for themselves anyway. But we know that people don't do a lot of things that are good for themselves in a lot of other areas. How many people, how many women, Teresa, 50 plus, who regularly go and get their mammogram and other tests? Do they do it of their own volition? Men getting their prostate screening and their colonoscopy, do people do it? We know this is good for us, but we don't do it. I think what makes these infectious diseases different is that when they don't do it, then it impacts on other people. So the externalities are really high. The negative externalities, which is a term we use in economics, where when you undertake an action and you don't bear the full cost of your action, you and your love. So if you choose not to do certain types of health screening, then you get sick, you die, or whatever, it affects you and your family. But in the case of something like COVID-19, when you don't do it, then you are affecting a significant number of other people. So in the cases of those externalities, you need a much more vigorous response and far-reaching. So I think we need to appreciate the scale of the problem. So again, non-financial incentive, the extra day off, some other little perk that could be offered to really just push people along, or actually just cutting through the noise, just getting into their heads that this is a thing to go and do, because they may be tuning out your other messages. They're not part of the group that your other messages are reaching, but the notion that you could get an extra vacation day or something like that, I say, okay, well, I can do that.
Okay, we'll take our second break and come back in a short moment.
Band's winner, Thierry Lockhart. I am urging you to practice social distancing to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Avoid large gatherings, and if you have to stand in a line, make sure you are 3 feet apart from the other person. Get vaccinated today, protect yourself, and be responsible.
And I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right. Man and woman, let us join in the fight.
Friday, September 3rd, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $90,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $90,000.
welcome back. And just to remind you that you can make your contribution to the program via our Facebook or YouTube pages. Professor Robinson, let's talk about the economic fallout from COVID-19. Just how intense and severe is this likely to be, and what are the likely impacts?
Yeah, and it's not all about the dollars, but I mean, and part of the reason why I'm kind of passionate about the need for us to use all the tools in our toolkit is that the economic financial fallout from COVID-19 is horrendous. And I, you know, and I would start from something that is not so I think is not so obvious. If school children, if children are not doing, if they're not doing face-to-face school, if they're not going to school, Teresa, what's the economic impact of that? We're not even talking like tourism and other things like that. If the children are not going to school, what's the effect in the economy?
Severe.
You know, so the children have to catch a van to go to school. So the van drivers can't make their normal money. You know, when I was a schoolboy in St. Vincent, I used to love to go by People Tray and buy your tamarind balls and a lot of things like that. And in many ways, the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for or the use of movement restriction shutdowns, it really impacts disproportionately on persons at the lower end. It's those small businesses. You know, so at UWI, we can shift and do a lot of our teaching online. We do Zoom and other things, and it works well. So from that viewpoint, we can make that pivot. The banks, a lot of other places, they can do their online banking and so on. But in the informal economy, a lot of those small, medium-sized businesses, that foot traffic, that movement around is critical to their lives and livelihoods. You know, where I live here in Barbados in St. Philip, one of the things that you know, when I'm driving home from UB on a Friday evening, I pass all these little shops and bars where people are making a living with their Friday evening karaoke, doing their barbecue. These people are suffering. So, you know, the school children going to school is a whole economy around that. Entertainment, the arts, our calypsonians, a lot of others. So the fallout in our small and medium-sized enterprises, persons at the lower end, the informal economy, is just horrendous. And, you know, we think about it, we are in September 2021. I mean, St. Vincent, well, it's 2 years we haven't had carnival. You know, are we looking at a third year without a carnival? So that economic impact in terms of jobs, people's ability to earn money to feed their families, especially at the lower end. Because these are persons who are living month to month, but not even month to month, almost day to day. So every day they can't make a sale on the street. It's really money that they are struggling to feed their families. So that's a very, I would say, basic man on the street fallout. Now, at the higher level, you have tourism. Caribbean economies are tourism dependent, St. Vincent not being among the most. And the tourism economy is in shambles. The latest figures I have seen is, for example, in 2020, tourism arrivals had the worst year on record, dropping almost 74%, you know, where destinations were welcoming like 1 billion fewer people than in the previous years. So that's a loss of like US 1.3 trillion in revenues. There's been a slight rebound in that this year, but nowhere near to get you where you need to go. Now, and where that now falls through is that when you come to our region, what you're faced with is every economy in the Caribbean except Guyana with their newfound oil wealth is recording negative economic growth for 2021. What that translates to is challenges in government finances. So the governments are hit with a double whammy. In responding to COVID-19, they need to increase expenditure. So the government is spending unexpected amounts on dealing with the pandemic. So your expenditure is high, but then your revenues are down. Because if people are not doing their normal transactions, then you're not collecting VAT and other transactions-based taxes, departure tax, people coming through your airport. So the gap in government revenues is massive. Now, if you're collecting less than you're spending, the way you fill that gap is borrowing. Now, when you borrow, you have to pay back plus interest. So again, those are liabilities that are being built up in the future. So even when the pandemic is gone, governments are going to have to be spending money that could be spent on healthcare, roads, and other things to pay back interest on money that was borrowed to take us through that. So the economic pain is unimaginable in that sense. And St. Vincent is in the unfortunate position where, we've had really what I call a triple whammy. COVID, dengue, plus La Soufrière has really disrupted our economy in ways that you really you almost can't foresee, and in a really unconscionable and a very difficult way. Because, so for example, the latest figures I had, like last year, St. Vincent's economy fell by 6.99%. Where we did a lot better than other places in the region, where you had Antigua down 17%, St. Kitts 18%, St. Lucia 17%, Barbados 19%, Bahamas 14%, Grenada 12%, Jamaica 11.6%. So we would have fared somewhat better because we are less tourism dependent than others. But as you have to have restrictions to manage the COVID-19 pandemic, then that disrupts all economic activity, even not tourist related. And on the ground, we feel it in terms of jobs, self-employed people not generating enough revenue at the more macro level. The low economic growth translates into serious fiscal deficits. Also, what we are also beginning to see in a major way, which is new, is inflation, rising prices, as COVID-19 has a multiplicity of effects. So with all the restrictions, global supply chains have been negatively impacted. So any goods that we import, we are seeing their costs go up because port fees and other costs related to sourcing and moving goods are rising. We are seeing in some parts that labor costs are going up because people are facing a shortage of workers. People are not coming out to work because their children are not in school. They can't afford health care. You have areas in the economy where people are taking early retirement because in areas like teaching and healthcare, because they feel those professions are quite high risk. So the COVID-19 pandemic is now bringing us another misery in the form of inflation because global supply chains are heavily impacted. So chicken is going up because the feed that we are importing to feed the chickens are all going up in cost. And these are all because COVID-19 is impacting global supply chains, global labor supply, and so on. So it's really an economic mess that I didn't think I would see in my lifetime after the global financial crisis of 2008-9. So really the world and the region is really dealing with, in 2008-9, I thought I was being cute and philosophical when I was saying we were having an economic crisis of biblical proportions, and I'm really out of terms for what we are facing now, because what we are facing now makes 2008-9 look like it looks like nothing. So the economic news all around is bad.
Okay. How can this economic mess, as you put it, be fixed, and how long?
Okay, so in terms of fixing, I would want to start at the global level. I know Caribbean countries, a lot of us, we have challenges accessing financing from the multilateral institutions at preferential rates because they say we are a little too well off. Now, faced with this unprecedented pandemic, I mean, with all the conspiracy theories around COVID, the one I haven't heard is that it started in the Caribbean or in St. Vincent. I haven't heard that one. So we didn't start it. We have to deal with it. So I think having access to low cost, but having access, one, to grant funding and financing at concessional terms, I think is an essential part of the socioeconomic response, especially for vulnerable small island states like ourselves. The vaccine, now, in a sense, the economic solution depends on a healthcare solution. In a sense, what is disrupting the economy?
Okay, we'll talk. Professor, let's talk more about that when we come back from this last break. Back in a moment.
VC3 News Update. The Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Alfie Gonsalves addressed the first Africa CARICOM Summit of Heads of State and Government. 5 cases of the new variant were detected between July 19th and August 9th, 2021. The Milton Cato Memorial Hospital recorded an overall 85% attendance rate during yesterday morning's 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift. We'll have these stories and more coming up at 7 p.m. on the VC3 News Update.
On Friday, September 10th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $93,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $93,000.
I am Hans John, the 2019 Vinci Ragasoka Monarch. I took the COVID-19 vaccine and so should you. Let's be an example to others. Get vaccinated today and help control the spread of COVID-19.
Vaccinate if you want to eliminate the spread of the virus in our place, and do not procrastinate, but rather let us vaccinate. Get vaccinated today.
Welcome back. When we took last break there, Professor Robertson was mentioning the fact that to come out of this economic crisis, we will need to have a fix in the health sector as well. And someone here is asking, would we ever get out of this crisis?
Yeah, so that's a fair question, and there are ways we can think about this, and again, in some ways, a lot of this really depends on what's happening on the health side. And I think one of the points we haven't really mentioned, which I think is an important point, is when you have these high levels of infections in a short space of time, one of the things we have to really keep in mind is the impact on the healthcare system. You know, early in the pandemic, there was a lot of messaging around flattening the curve. And I think it's important for people to keep that in mind. And I wouldn't want us to end without really getting at that, because you see, intensive care, ICU capacity, nobody builds excess capacity for ICU, Teresa. ICU care is highly specialized, is really very expensive. Healthcare systems don't have excess capacity in that area. Tremendous pressure on your ICU capacity in a short space of time can really create problems in your healthcare system. And as more and more of your healthcare resources get diverted to dealing with the urgency of people who are seriously ill, in danger of dying from COVID, then a number of other healthcare issues get neglected, and people can suffer and die from illnesses that they would otherwise not have died for, because so many of the resources are tied up there. So the healthcare response or the healthcare outcomes are going to be critical. And one of the possibilities that might have come is that so far we've been trying to end COVID, and countries at some point may also have to transition to a living with and managing COVID sort of way of dealing with the crisis. So I think we will get out of the crisis, and it will either be where we are able to successfully crush the pandemic, or societies transition to living with COVID. And you could argue that in some ways we are moving in that direction already, even though it's not really a stated policy. So I think we will get out of it. Whether we get out of it in a way where COVID is a thing of the past, or it's something that we have to navigate and live with as we go forward. Because as you have fast mutating variants and so on, which can impact on vaccine effectiveness, we have seen the capacity to develop vaccines quite quickly. But if the vaccine hesitancy remains at a certain level and you can't get enough people vaccinated, and with these mutating viruses, it may very well be that we never get to this kind of herd immunity, and it becomes something we sort of have to live with, which is going to be a major change. Because, you know, again, when I was a little boy in St. Vincent, I used to hear people talk a little bit about like things like TB, tuberculosis, and so on. But in modern times, we haven't really had to live with infectious diseases being this kind of constant threat to life in a way that early generations past would have had to deal with. So it may very well be that this is an infectious disease that we may very well, that's within the realm of possibility. I mean, I'm not really an expert on that aspect, but it may very well be that we have to learn to live with it. Now, in terms of getting forward, which you had asked, as I said, the economic solution, I think, lies first in the healthcare solution. And I think in terms of the healthcare solution, as far as we know now, there are the protocols that we've all been aware of now for a while: sanitize, social distancing, wearing your mask. So there are those protocols. And again, it's a fast changing thing. So I remember early in the pandemic, the sanitizing was the big thing. Now I'm hearing some messaging that really the mask is more important because of the breathing in directly. But so again, those protocols are critical. I think vaccinations are part of the solution. There are no silver bullet. But as far as we are aware to date, vaccines significantly reduce the risk of serious illness and death. So if we are to get to the point of living with COVID, and the very important issue of not overwhelming our healthcare system with seriously ill COVID-19 patients, then the COVID-19 vaccines, which reduce the risk of serious illness and death, I think are a critical part of the solution. So I think with the protocols and sufficient number of persons being vaccinated, we can get to a point where at least I think we can learn to live with COVID, at which point then a lot of the economic damage can begin to reverse itself as these restrictions are lifted. However, our governments in particular will likely be left with some debt hangover from responding to the pandemic. I think a structured global program of debt relief for pandemic-related debt for vulnerable small island developing states will be quite a critical part of the solution, so that economic growth in the future is not hampered by the fact that governments are left with this debt overhang and the debt burden that from the debt that they incurred in terms of dealing with COVID-19. So I think the medical solutions, and in terms of us, in terms of following the protocols, getting the vaccines, which again, don't stop you from getting or spreading as far as, but they seriously reduce the risk of getting seriously ill and dying from COVID-19, which is an outcome I think many people can deal with. And it also reduces the pressure on the healthcare system. And then because I think once that happens, a lot of economic activity can resume at a level to begin to right some of the wrongs. However, governments in the region will likely be left with this debt overhang, and a global, coordinated, structured way of pandemic-related debt forgiveness, debt restructuring is going to be critical, so that the pandemic-related debt doesn't really become a drag on our economic growth. And the extent to which funding can be sourced, because it's not only the governments that may have a hangover from this, it may very well be businesses, institutions, and households. And again, a globally funded, coordinated way to provide relief, so that again, households and others are really not left strangled from the fallout, economic fallout of going through this pandemic.
Before you go, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel for Caribbean economies?
Yes, I do see some light at the end of the tunnel. I think the medical community, the scientists have done us proud in terms of producing the vaccine. What I would want to do is urge our politicians, our civil society, and other players to really use all of their tools at their disposal to really up the vaccination rate. What if our politicians and their organizations approach the vaccination drive the way they approach trying to get votes? You know, you get out there, you use all of your influence to try to to persuade people. Mandatory vaccines in some areas and so on, where you need it for certain things, may be part of the solution. And again, you need that toolkit. My preference, top tool, persuasion, use all the tools, the influencers and so on. But because of the high threshold we need to get to with vaccination, I don't think we can take some of the tools that we know we don't like, that we all find, morally we're not so comfortable with them, and we shouldn't be, but we may very well need some mandatory vaccines, some various types of incentives to really get to that level. And I think with the protocols, the messaging, and the vaccines, I do see a way forward with the pandemic. There are some positive side effects in terms of the transitioning, the speeding up of e-commerce, e-business. It certainly heightened discussion and maybe hopefully brought some urgency around the need to diversify our economic basis so that we are not so dependent on tourism in that sense. So I do see light, and again, maybe I'm exhibiting one of the traits I mentioned at the start, that I'm overconfident and an optimist by nature.
Okay, good note on which to end this evening's edition of Roundtable Talk. Thank you so very much, cousin, for coming on this evening and sharing with us. Stay safe, and we'll see sometime. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. And see you again next week, Wednesday, at 6. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Band's winner, Thierry Lockhart. I am urging you to practice social distancing to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Avoid large gatherings, and if you have to stand in a line, make sure you are 3 feet apart from the other person. Get vaccinated today, protect yourself, and be responsible.
And I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right. Man and woman, let us join in the fight.
Coming up on the VC3 News Update, the Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Ralphie Gonsalves addressed the first Africa-CARICOM Summit of Heads of State and Government. 5 cases of the new variant were detected between July 19th and August 9th, 2021. The Milton Cato Memorial Hospital recorded an overall 85% attendance rate during yesterday morning's 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift. We'll have these stories and more coming up at 7 p.m. on the VC3 News Update.
Hello and hi.
Hello everyone, I am Shakel Bob. I am a former Miss Pitani, a former Miss Rural SVG and Miss SVG contestant and runner-up. I'm a lawyer by profession but a pageant lover at heart. Do not let the negatives prey on your mind, because a stitch in time saves 9. So, it's COVID vaccination time. Get vaccinated today to reduce the impact of COVID-19 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
And I urge you, get vaccinated. It is safe and it is effective. Stop the spread, help the fight, and make the choice that is right. And let us unite and do the thing right.
On Friday, September 10th, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $93,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $93,000.